What's something that poor people do better than rich people? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Handle crises in stride. I was homeless at times as a teen, and I'm now watching my middle class and rich friends really freak out in midlife. They take every problem or roadblock as a personal offense, whereas I'm like, did I eat dinner tonight? Yeah. Then I'm good. Bad things happen, my dudes. Story 2. Handle adversity. I'm a pharmacist and I've worked in ultra-wealthy communities as well as very poor areas. And without question, it's the poor income folks that are better able to handle when things go wrong. If a substance isn't available, or there's a mix-up with their prescription, they are much more understanding and reasonable in their responses. The rich people lose their shoot at even the most minor inconvenience. It's not quite ready yet. Give me 5 more minutes. It'll take the poor people every day of the week. They are the real ones. Answer, this is so true. My wife works in acute mental health, and of the clients she sees, only about 20 are actual legitimate mental issues. The other 80 is split between substances-induced psychosis and young adults from privileged households who just got their first dose of reality and can't manage. Just to add, by legitimate mental issues, I mean diagnosable mental disorders like schizophrenia, OCD, clinical depression, serious trauma, etc., as opposed to external factors like substances, not trying to stigmatize anything. Story 3. Generosity. Poor people are more likely to share. It goes against common sense, but it's been proven. Homeless people are known to be especially generous as they understand how it feels to be without. Answer. In Puerto Rico, during the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Maria, it was total devastation. Rich and poor alike were stranded. No immediate government help. It was chaos and survival. There is a part of our town where the rich folks live, and they made so much effort to make it exclusive and secluded that they had no way out other than walk across the coastal line. A group of these rich folks came walking to our poor neighborhood, asking for food and water. Some of them hadn't had anything to eat but water for the last 48 hours. They were really in bad shape. Bro, we live in a coastal town. There's all kinds of seafood, crabs, fruit trees, basically all you need to survive. Zero survival instinct in some of these folks. Story 4. I work in property management and maintenance, and you would be surprised how many white-collar people can't figure out the simplest tasks like flipping a breaker, resetting a garbage disposal, or plunging a toilet. Answer. Had a no-flush work order once. Walk in and dude's holding a stovetop, and it smells like shoot. Oh, perfect timing. I've been having to use this. Edit to flush, IDK what's wrong, is it perfect timing? I go and flip the valve on for the water. Plumbers had turned it off earlier in the day to snake multiple lines to help clear copious construction debris and trash, causing multiple backups in a newly built residence. Go and tell him it's fixed after I flushed it a few times. What? Already? What was wrong? I tell him, the valve was just off for the water. He says, well, what do I do if it happens again? I showed him it and explained how to turn it. But let me ask you, what has this man done anytime he clogged a toilet and the water was about to overflow? How do you reach adulthood without knowing some of this stuff? I'm not shaming nor judging, but Lord, it's scary sometimes. Story 5. They tend to be more creative with limited resources. Small, random, but relatable example. Using leftovers of whatever is in the fridge pantry and making an awesome meal. Instead of going out and buying fancy ingredients to make whatever you want in that moment, you need to get creative and hopefully develop some skill. Story 6. I did my PhD at Harvard. I am first-gen college, and while I didn't grow up poor per se, but not very wealthy, Harvard has people from every possible background. When I would teach undergrads, it was entirely clear that the wealthy kids were better equipped for difficult material, but the kids from more humble backgrounds were much better critical thinkers. They were not obsessed about giving the textbook right answer, lower-level memory skills, and were much more interesting, less worried, and better equipped to draw broadly and deeply to come up with nuanced answers. That's not to say that the poor kids were always more intelligent, although considering that those students had a much harder time getting to the university, they probably were on average to make it that far. But rather, very talented people who grew up poor were simply far more well-rounded in how they think and handle problems. They were also less likely to grade grub or cheat. They cared more about learning than their grades, and they took their education very seriously, as they knew its true value. Story 7. From what I've been through, having less really teaches you how to roll with the punches, appreciate the little things, and understand what others are going through. That kind of strength sticks with you and changes how you see the world. Sure, money can open doors, but the grit and gratitude from tough times shape who you really are. Story 8. I grew up poor American, and my husband grew up upper middle class European. I took for granted my dad knowing how to fix everything. I remember getting a leak under our sink, and I told my husband to fix it, and he stared at me like I grew two heads. I then had to turn off the water myself because he didn't know how to do that. I have found he doesn't know how to problem solve. He just stares until I move into action. It's been 10 years and he is better now. Story 9. Cooking. To make a lot of cheap cuts good, you have to know what you're doing. A filet is a 7-minute cook. Same with a gorgeous salmon. You want to make turnips and brisket good, you need to know what you're doing. Story 10. Poor people are usually more willing to help others in need, even though they may be in need themselves, because we know what it's like to be without. When I was on the streets, the people that gave the most were folks that were one bad day away from homelessness, destitution themselves. Most rich people usually just look at homeless people as subhuman and always assume everyone that's there did something to deserve being there, which is extremely far from the truth in more cases than not. Story 11. Not being wasteful with food. Poor people will make enough food and eat everything on their plate. They take home their leftovers from restaurants and give it to their spouse, or eat it later. Rich people will order more than they'll eat so they can try different flavors, not eat at all, and not take home leftovers. Story 12. Live. I spent enough time as a homeless person around those from wealth. They always need external things, from objects to social validation. I am perfectly content spending an afternoon with a tree and watching the sky while these weirdos are upset about their paint color or their clothing brand or their vacation package. It is so weird I can't understand caring. You have food, warmth, a home, access to medical care. The rest are hallucinations of the depraved. Story 13. Practically everyone I know is a millionaire. They aren't good at anything except making money. They are generally shallow, lonely, and miserable people. Most millionaires I know don't work. They also think that poor people make $10,000 a month. They are out of touch with reality. As a poor person, I appreciate the little things that they don't even understand or wouldn't even notice. Also, whether they have 1 million, 200 million, or a billion, they all pretty much have the same lifestyle. Meaning, once you have $1 million, the rest is just partied too hard, not circulating in the economy. Nobody should ever have more than 10 million. That should be the maximum allowable cap. Everything over 5 million should be taxed at no less than 80. Story 14. Survival probably, by which I mean the poor would survive and adapt to an after the end of the world scenario better than a rich person. A poor person is already used to finding ways to cope with nothing, especially like homeless living on the streets level poor. Story 15. A whole lot of stuff. A lot of poor people just know how to do a ton of stuff most rich people don't even know how to do, like laundry, cleaning our own homes, repairing things like clothes, vehicles, home maintenance, cooking, making things, and just being a heck of a lot more resourceful than folks that just pay people to do everything for them or buy something new even before their old stuff breaks. Story 16. Being environmentally friendly. Out of necessity, consuming less, reusing items, getting the most out of what you have, and overall polluting less. No poor person is taking weekly or daily flights, often less driving and more utilization of public mass transit. Story 17. Empathy, generosity, preservance, work ID. I can't think of many things someone being rich would have an advantage on in any way that isn't purely them having a massive crutch to lean on with their money. Business decisions, leisure activities, blow me LMFAO. Story 18. I raised 6 kids in a 1,500 FLSF house I kept for 30 years. We were dirt jerk poor and at one point had 4 boarded windows on the back of the house. We faced balancing which utility we were going to find shut off when we got home from work. No entertainment, lots of hamburger helper, dollar menu items. It was ugly and caused me incredible stress. I worked 2 jobs, couldn't sleep, and quietly suffered inside giving my kids the best of me that I had left. I was making crap money, had a state job that I absolutely dislike, that the stress caused me to vomit almost every morning on my way out the door. The kids grew up. Some got degrees, some advanced degrees, some married military, and of them all, one struggles the same way I did, keeping her children from knowing just how poor they really are. It changed overnight when, as a reservist, I got called to active duty in the military. The pay was more than double what I was making at my job. So first payday, I paid the bills and got a window fixed. Next payday, same. I started putting money into deferred compensation like the government's thrift savings plan. I got credit from the state for time I was on active duty 5.5 years and retired in 2021 after 20 years with a pension. The active duty allowed me to get the GI Bill, so I went to school full-time while working, got 2 degrees, got paid for going. Retired from reserves in 2011 and VA disability started in 2013. The back pay in a mutual fund gave us the 20 down on another house in a low-cost part of the country, and the monthly compensation from the VA almost took care of the mortgage payment. State pension is 50 of my salary, but without all the withholding for investments or pension. We sold our home and moved to Texas, where we paid off everything. Now we have a 6-figure retirement income and absolutely no debt. I refuse to even buy a tractor because it costs too much, so I do it all with a walk-behind 2-wheel tractor with attachments. I refuse the idea of accumulating more debt. I'd rather wish I had something than pay for it. My mentality shifted when I paid everything off. I feel free. Hope you all get to this place. It is such a blessing. Best wishes. Story 19. Quite literally everything. Rich people are generally devoid of all useful skills outside of a boardroom. Any physical labor whatsoever. Any customer service jobs of any kind. Any job requiring critical thinking, insight, and compromise. Understanding basic human needs, empathy, and just how hard life can be for some people, or even most people at some point. Rich people rarely have a good sense of humor. They're too disconnected from the realities of life to be relatable. They generally have no real opinions, taste, or fashion. They just go with whatever is most expensive, for better or worse. Extreme wealth is really an all-around tragic disorder, which not only sets off a rapid process of self-aggrandizing and delusion, but also paranoia, insecurity, and egomania. It's not tragic because the rich are psychos. It's tragic because the only way anyone becomes that rich is by exploiting the working class. So millions and billions of humans have to live on the edge of survival just so some rich folks can go absolutely batshit crazy on money and power. Nothing good ever came from it. Nothing ever trickled down to the workers. It was always just senseless, irrational hoarding at everyone else's expense. Story 20. They are humble and appreciate every single thing they have. They have better manners and understand please and thank you go a long way. They know how to survive with very little what they have. They make the best out of life more emo. They understand that life is not about materialism, but about taking care of each other. Story 21. Have genuine friends. I feel like the rich circle turns into a game of one-upping each other. Who's got the nicer house, car, better job, nicer neighborhood? There's so much comparing in those circles. When I didn't have much, moments with friends just felt genuine. Story 22. I find they have a lot more community spirit. I grew up in a rich neighborhood and now live in a working class estate. Rich neighbors were friendly but distant. Neighbors down here all socialize together, help with each other's kids, offer support when someone's having a hard time. It's a really beautiful thing. Story 23. In my experience, it's being generous. A friend of mine is a postman, and once he was telling me that the poor districts of the city are more popular among his colleagues because they tend to get more tips when working there. Story 24. Cook. Using America as an example, if there's one uniquely and quintessentially American cuisine, it's barbecue. Slow-smoked, well-seasoned meats. That wasn't invented by some millionaire's private chef or something. It was poor Southern folk doing what they could with the ingredients they had available to them, and it's some of the best darn food you can find. Hell, how about tacos? Those aren't haute cuisine, it's a peasant dish. And honestly, even upscale cuisine, it's by and large not millionaires from rich families who are inventing it. It's passionate chefs who want to cook and make a modest living doing it. Usually if they become rich, it's off the back of their success as a chef, not vice versa. Story 25. Repair their own things, usually pretty well too. I grew up and lived most of my adult life poor. We're not rich by any means now, but we're financially sound. We need to replace our back deck, and my boyfriend wants to hire it out. I said, absolutely not. It is 100 something I can do in a weekend, or 2. I told him if he wants to pay someone, he can pay me. Story 26. Tolerance. I feel like rich people get this insane entitlement, which makes them think everything that is inconvenient must be fixed or eliminated. And one main thing poorer people do is withstand broken, used, or unclean things because they have no choice, basically. Poor people can learn skills to help them cope as a result of not having the money to buy services or new things each and every time. No, we don't have the newest phone model, but we can fix a computer to work a bit better. No, our kitchen appliances aren't the newest models, but we keep everything clean and we find innovative ways to make it work for US. No, our homes aren't full of top-of-the-line furniture and we don't own penthouses, but we can DIY some stuff to make ourselves feel more at home. No, our food is not the freshest and healthiest like LA's Urun, but we share recipes in our communities to give our meals nutritional value and flavor. Point is, we make it work with us, whereas richer people make people work for them. Story 27. Give. A poor person will give their last $20 and ask for nothing in return. They will show up to help a friend who is moving and lift heavy objects for 4 hours for a slice of pizza and a couple beers. A poor person will give what little they have left just to help another not be in their situation. A rich person will give the least possible while bragging about how much they give, and they will do it so no one else can share their situation. Story 28. I am so grateful for a warm shower and a bed to sleep in. I think about how many people would absolutely prefer my situation, regardless of the other problems I have. Struggle gives you so much appreciation for little things. I also faced homelessness and food insecurity in adolescence, and I can confidently say I am happier being an adult. Story 29. I am well off by a lot. My family's wealthy, but I was living in a tarp, eating beans, surrounded by mentally ill people for 2 months, and that shoot changes you a ton. You become so insanely tough, but also don't realize you have a lot of emotional baggage behind, and it can become such a pain later in your life. Even when I'm safe, I am in guard. Dropping that barrier down is so hard. I can imagine how it must feel to live in the streets for years. Story 30. This is a really interesting quote. I used to deliver pizzas for Domino's, and I swear to God, the best tips I got consistently were from people in the trailer parks not too far from our store. I wish I was making that up. Some of the loveliest people I've ever met. Story 31. I once got stranded in the rough part of town with a dead battery. I opened the hood and within moments had 5 guys helping me. They organized jumper cables a car to jump from and told me I can break the battery open, pee in it a few times, and it's going to last a while longer. And then they told me to get out of there ASAP. Enter Story 32. 100. My parents were dirt poor their whole life, but if anyone ever came to them for any kind of help, they do whatever they could. Contrast that against myself, grown up now and living in a suburb. I could imagine going to a neighbor's house to ask for anything. They probably wouldn't answer the door, let alone hear me out on whatever issue I had. Story 33. So true. My daughter traveled to Cuba. Cubans have nothing, and yet they are humble, kind, and generous people. Not a bitter bone in their body. Yes, they would give you the shirt off their back. Such amazing, strong, nonviolent, rage-less people who always have a smile on their face. Story 34. That's because pain is proportionate to experience. To someone, why has never had an injury before a scrapped knee can feel like dying. It's why kids wail over minor scrapes. To someone living a charmed life, the slightest inconvenience feels like a grave injustice. Someone who is shat on regularly realizes shoot happens and you just deal with it. Story 35. This is so true. My wife works in acute mental health, and of the clients she sees, only about 20 are actual legitimate mental issues. The other 80 is split between substances-induced psychosis and young adults from privileged households who just got their first dose of reality and can't manage. Just to add, by legitimate mental issues, I mean diagnosable mental disorders like schizophrenia, OCD, clinical depression, serious trauma, etc., as opposed to external factors like substances. Not trying to stigmatize anything. Story 36. Rich people, especially those that grew up rich, don't understand how to scrap to make a project work. Dated a girl who refused to make a documentary about her dying grandparents because she needed $10,000 and a special camera and crew and mic. I'm like, WTF are you talking about? And made her entire video with an iPhone, a 20 mic, my grandparents, and a little post-editing just to piss her off. Story 37. I've been on both extremes and I agree fully. I appreciate what I have and am careful because I don't want to go back. The people I know who have always been wealthy can be unappreciative and disrespectful. Yet people who have never had a dime and still don't can be pretty judgmental about people doing what they want with their own money and things. Story 38. I had $1,000 left over from my student loans, and a few of my close coworkers were talking with me one day about how I should spend it since I'd never had that much money before. A different coworker walks in and is like, it's only $1,000, what's the big deal? I always have at least that much in my account for rainy days. Like honey, as someone who grew up so poor that I was learning at 8 years old how to poach rabbit and duck because we couldn't afford to buy meat, 1,000 is an insane amount of money. Story 39. The way I think is if a person can eat the best chocolate of the world anytime they want, let's say once a day, and no other chocolate is as good as this chocolate, this person is unable to eat the bad ones, and his joy of eating the good chocolate will be high, but fall over time. A person who eats mostly bad chocolate, and sometimes the good one, will have a far better enjoyment of the good chocolate. If thinking about a graph, the total enjoyment of only eating the best will be smaller than sometimes eating the best. Maybe that's why rich people seems to do substances more often. They have everything, so the next hit of dopamine could be substances fun. On the other side, poor people who have nothing needs cheap stuff to cope. Story 40. I had a 99 Avalon as my first car in 2013. Poorly taken care of, rusty, broken shocks, some windows didn't open, had to add oil every few hundred miles, no AC, ran it into the ground until 2019. Now I have a 18A4. I had some wealthier family ask me over the years if I've gotten used to it yet, like when the excitement calms down. Hell no. Every time I step in, I feel comfort and relief with the beauty that is that car. Every so often I audibly, say I love this car. I do my own maintenance repairs to save money. It helps when I have to replace something expensive I can't do myself. But it's well maintained. I hope to hold on until it becomes financially unviable to hold it anymore. So maybe another decade, hopefully. Story 41. This is such an interesting point of view when you have seen both, being poor and doing really good. I'm from a poor family in a rural area where we basically had nothing as kids. No consoles or anything, just a TV. Later in life, several lucky streaks got me a good job, and eventually I could buy high electronics and stuff easily. But what makes me different to my colleagues, who many come from at least middle-class families? I treasure everything I own. A laptop that cost a lot, I don't throw it around knowing I could technically buy a new one, but because having it means something to me. There's also really odd takes from richer people about being poor. When it comes up how much my childhood sucked, people will blurt out stuff like, "But you were happy because you were kids and you didn't know you were poor," or something. I've gotten monologues how fortunate I have been to play with toys made from household trash. Guess what? I knew I was poor, so did my siblings. We had friends. Those friends had big TVs in the 80s, consoles and computers. It was very obvious how poor we were when our second-hand clothes with patches and stuff were always pointed out, or my younger brothers bullied for having to wear my old jackets and other stuff that was unisex enough. Story 42. I once worked at a bank call center. A man called questioning his 1.86 purchase he made at McDonald's. He paid in cash and had the receipt to show the debit was declined. I credited the transaction back. He had over 1.2 million in his checking account. I am dumbfounded how he even noticed. The rich monitor every penny. Story 43. This is true, but it's also probably the reason those high earners achieve financial freedom. I have so much more freedom and savings now that I track every penny. Thanks, YNAB. That said, I've never sent anyone a Venmo request, and I think being generous, picking up a meal here and there, buying a round or covering a night out, springing for thoughtful gifts, is a very good thing when possible, especially when you're aware your friends don't make as much as you do. Answer. I think it's more that the traits that allow people to become rich often result in them being the type to penny pinch. The reality is that these little amounts genuinely will not affect them, even over a lifetime. But the type of person who is very aware and protective of where their money goes is also more likely to keep track of the petty stuff. And a lot of stuff like the friends they make and larger purchases are calculated. Friends are often other rich people and useful connections. Big purchases are not just things they like, but also items that will not depreciate in value, so their wealth stays the same or increases in a non-taxable way. Story 44. It's not against common sense. They're coming together to survive. They'll experience it time and time again, so much it becomes natural. Being greedy and all in for only yourself in this setting would only serve to hurt you. Story 45. I might say that people with less resources money are more community-driven and share automatically, whereas richer people do it strategically, i.e., they can be generous with those that are likely to give something in return. It's not the rule, but a common trend. Story 46. The rich like to say, well, if they were more prudent, they might not be poor. But that's a cop-out. I think the cause effect tends to be different than how they imagine it. Generous people with less are often both of these things due to being less concerned with building wealth and status and more concerned with actually living their lives. Story 47. In Puerto Rico, during the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Maria, it was total devastation. Rich and poor alike were stranded, no immediate government help, It was chaos and survival. There is a part of our town where the rich folks live, and they made so much effort to make it exclusive and secluded that they had no way out other than walk across the coastal line. A group of these rich folks came walking to our poor neighborhood asking for food and water. Some of them hadn't had anything to eat but water for the last 36 to 48 hours. They were really in bad shape. Bro, we live in a coastal town. There's all kinds of seafood, crabs, fruit trees. Basically, all you need to survive. Zero survival instinct in some of these folks. Story 48. Not only that, but many super rich people became this rich for a reason, and it sure as hell wasn't willingly and fairly sharing their wealth with other people. Whether we're talking about employees who need to piss in bottles to meet their quota, or the broader society of their own country. Outsourcing and/or tax evasion. Story 49. Okay, flipping a breaker and resetting a disposal. We'll call level 2 out of 10 on the not Moe's hardness scale, but plunging a toilet? You've been called out to? Had to call someone else out to plunge a grown adult's toilet? Is this a belated April Fool's joke? Story 50. Had a no-flush work order once. Walk in and dude's holding a stovetop and it smells like shoot. Oh, perfect timing. I've been having to use this edit to flush IDK what's wrong. Is it perfect timing? I go and flip the valve on for the water. Plumbers had turned it off earlier in the day to snake multiple lines to help clear copious construction debris and trash, causing multiple backups in a newly built residence. Go and tell him it's fixed after I flushed it a few times. What? Already? What was wrong? I tell him, the valve was just off for the water. He says, well, what do I do if it happens again? I showed him it and explained how to turn it. But let me ask you, what has this man done anytime he clogged a toilet and the water was about to overflow? How do you reach adulthood without knowing some of this stuff? I'm not shaming nor judging, but Lord, it's scary sometimes. Story 51. As someone on the development side of the business, generally speaking, our buildings ask people to call maintenance rather than try to fix it themselves and make things worse. That's why we have a maintenance team for the property. Even if 100 times it goes fine, it's still cheaper to send a guy to fix it than have a resident try, fail, and flood 3 units. Story 52. I can plunge a toilet and I learned the breaker after calling someone the first time. Speaking of which, my garbage disposal is broken again and the Allen key thingy didn't work, so I guess I gotta call someone again. Other than school, I wasn't taught any life skills. Story 53. Same. My mom could make a casserole out of anything, including frozen remnants of other leftover casseroles. Growing up, there wasn't much, but there was enough of it. We never had to have sleep for dinner. Story 54. I'm extremely middle class and am over the moon about it. I love it so darn much. I never dreamed I'd be this successful. I have friends and coworkers who come from privilege, money, and they never seen content with that they got. They always want more. Answer. Yeah, this is the best one in this thread. Grew up poor, now upper middle class or slightly above, and I really don't give a shoot about climbing any higher because what I have is so far beyond what I ever thought I deserved. I have a small business that I could probably grow into a big thing, and I just don't really want to because I'm so content with what I have that I'm complacent about anything more. I'm still waiting for the day I don't have some moment of gratitude for the life I have. Maybe on that day I'll decide to try to climb higher, but I don't think it's going to happen. Story 55. I think this one is especially true. Just taking a moment to ask, is my computer really dying? Or is this a bum charger? Or how hard would it be to change this headlight myself is tremendously valuable. I think a lot of people lose that as their income increases. Some of it has to do with the time value of money, of course. But I think even that modicum of grit is important to maintain. Story 56. This one is my favorite. I think poorer people are used to adapting to the environment, while wealthier folks seem to try to force the environment to change for their desires. I've seen this so much with people who move into my rural hometown from outside the area. Story 57. My wife grew up dirt poor and now works in the corporate sector for a company you all use and love. What she's brought to her branch is morals. Fudge the pizza parties. She's gunning for bonuses for her people. She loves pizza, dislike pizza parties. People at the bottom want cash in hand. Story 58. IDK. My poor family members always have the newest phones, while mine is barely functioning at this point. They also fill the house at Christmas time with things they can afford. We've told them they need to have a budget and stop spending on non-necessities, but they will never do that. Story 59. More reliant on community and social networks of family and friends, and more proactive in mutual help. For example, more frequent neighborhood assistance, resource sharing, and caring for the elderly and children. Story 60. My grandmother grew up around that time too. The frugality habits she learned as a kid stayed with her for life until she died. As a kid watching her, I remember small things like wiping a piece of bread around the inside of a jar of jam, so those last little bits of jam are not partied too hard. Even though by that stage of her life, she was financially comfortable, and the value of that last bit of jam was a few cents at most. Old habits never die. Story 61. I live in a trailer park, and one of the Pizza Hut guys thanked me once saying they get excited when they see my address because I'm a good house. I thought it was really sweet. I've worked as a waitress on and off, so I get how important it is to tip. Story 62. Same here as a waitress. Name brand everything, snooty look on the face, 10-12, jammies, ripped jeans, dirty nails, hair in a sloppy bun, 20-50. Blue-collar people get the struggle and like to bless our own when we can. People that have never had to do a hard job think, oh, why should I tip 15-20 for driving a pizza, carrying a plate, carrying my bags? Story 63. 100. I deliver with Uber Eats and Aus, where tipping isn't required. I only receive tips from less financially off people. Rich people are just entitled and believe they're to be served. Also, some of the requests they have are ridiculous. Story 64. I'm a former TV technician. Whenever we were out on service calls to private customers, it was almost always the ones who didn't have much money who gave us tips, so I can totally relate to your experience. My favorite customer was a lovely elderly lady who had homemade Christmas cookies for us every year when we helped her put up her Christmas lights. Just one of those things you end up doing as a TV technician in a small village. Story 65. When my sister bonded out of jail, my 70-something mom went down to 26th California, Chicago, to pick her up. There were a half a dozen men standing on the corner. Some were white, some were black. They could see how cold my mom was. One guy saved a parking spot for her, told her to get her car parked there. The men asked my mom what my sister's name was, what she looked like, so my mom stayed in her warm car. When my sister came out, the men called her name, showed her where my mom was parked. Story 66. Yes, this is one of those things where everyone's anecdotal evidence will vary, and the wealth of the neighborhood isn't really the important variable. I grew up actually poor, and most of our neighbors were shitbags. There was no Hollywood trauma bonding, just trash behavior and selfishness. I live in a wealthy exurb now, and my neighbors are unbelievably kind and community-driven. Money isn't the variable in play here. It's other stressors that create friction and apathy amongst communities. Story 67. Honestly, though, a couple months back, I was walking into Costco, and there was an older guy next to me with his hood up. I asked if he needed a jump, and he was so grateful. He was shocked that I even had cables in my van. He tried to give me cash, and I could never accept money for a gesture that literally cost me 5 minutes of my life. I told my fiance that he acted like it was a big deal, and he looked at me and told me that anymore, it is a big deal. People don't help anymore. What a sad world we live in. Story 68. A friend of mine with darker skin got what looked to me to be a light sunburn on vacation, but it was their first sunburn. My other buddy with light skin was blistering. Guess who complained 10 and X more than the other? Story 69. I would argue it's more that money buys time. There are people used to everything being there for them. Want some food? You have Uber. Want to go somewhere? Take a taxi. Want priority queue? VIP ticket. So when something does not go their way, they will try to do anything they can for it to go their way, including berating others because that's what they're used to. Story 70. Cajun food. How about we take French cooking tradition, fudge it up severely, grab literally any animal you can find over there in that swamp, make it into a stew on, it'll be the best thing you've ever tasted. Story 71. That's impressive AF. I know space agencies that do launches around the world rely on specific parts from random places in Europe, often MESC, technical university offshoots that only exist to work with specific metals and material testing. Did they just fury rig everything themselves? Is launching drones probes different when you are brown? Story 72. It really pisses me off when a disaster happens and they get on TV, paid programming by the way, and beg us to go into our pockets to help the victims when the government should be doing that. Even down to the round up $1 at the local substances store that's worth billions and whose C-suite staff makes more money than the whole store staff put together. Story 73. Give to charity. The poorest group, 25K a year, give 12 of their income. The richest give 2. That's a bit disingenuous. According to your link, the top 15 of income earners, i.e. the richest, give $5,805 on average, whereas the bottom 15 of income earners, i.e. the poorest, give $9.34. To word it differently, people in the top 15 give 6x more money to charity than the lowest 15. Story 74. This was the amount we would get as a tax return when we were in college. And I wept. I felt so rich. I was able to get real Tide detergent at the good grocery store, and we went out to our favorite Chinese restaurant for a celebratory feast. I will never forget that. Story 75. At this point in my life, retired, 1,000 is no big deal. But there have been times in my life when if something cost 10, I couldn't buy it. I would never dream of making a remark like that to trivialize your financial situation. What a jerk. Story 76. I used to be a mover in my younger days, and those that were obviously squeezing pennies to pay for our services were always far more gratuitous than those that just viewed us as a necessary part of going from $1 million McMansion to another. Struggle breeds appreciation. Story 77. I worked at a Domino's for a short stint. My town had a private academy, boarding school. Everyone disliked having to deliver to the school. The staff especially were fudge awful. My dad worked delivery before I got there, and there was one night a massive order was placed. It took 2 delivery drivers to deliver the pizza, and they were made to schlep it into the venue. When they finished, the organizer said, "God bless, and remember, He provides in many ways," and shut the door on them. They got a 60 tip to split between the two of them. However, whenever the welfare and disability checks hit, the local trailer parks were the places to be. They'd tip astonishingly well and were always nice. Around Christmas, they'd send the drivers back to tie-dye the store with Christmas cookies and cakes for everyone. Story 78. Strangely, worked as a server and had the opposite experience. Worked in restaurants all ranging from, "My car needs a wheel lock on it when I go to work just in case," to, "I can't even afford to breathe the air in the place I work." The super fancy restaurants I worked at were all tip included, so I can't include that, but the disparity between lower middle and upper middle class always baffled me. Absolutely broke people were chill, didn't tip well, but more often than not very pleasant. Lower middle were frequently horrible, wouldn't tip, and would be quite demanding and rude. Upper middle were genuinely such sweet and amazing people and tipped well, would even have pretty frequent days where I'd leave work with gifts from my tables on top of money. Disclaimer. Not saying this is the norm everywhere, just what I experienced. Upper middle class in defining as Nordstrom's restaurants regulars, since that's where I used to work, that felt more, not quite wealthy, but not really middle class either. Story 79. I'm a bartender at an arcade. We host trivia on alternating Wednesdays. It draws a certain crowd. Very middle-class 30-somethings. The most polite people and worst tippers. The kind of people who would turn up their nose. Because tipping culture is bad, you should be earning a better wage. And probably never worked behind a bar or in a kitchen. Also the kind of people who would be most vocal about any sort of hike in price. When we book metal shows and have a crowd of blue-collar service industry workers, our pockets are stuffed by the end of the night. Story 80. Really, my experience was always the opposite. Rich never really blinked at 20 on a 100-200 tab. The spots I've worked that were more on the dive bar end, no one ever tipped more than $1 or $2. About the same work, though. Story 81. I was a valet at a wedding venue on Long Island. It's fudge up, but we knew how the tips were going to be based on the last names. Nobody tipped better than a blue-collar Greek or Italian with a minivan. Certain last names will never beat the allegations, though. Story 82. Rich people are the worst tippers on the planet, if they even bother to tip at all. I will cancel a DoorDash delivery if I find out it's going to a bougie neighborhood, because there's no way those assholes are tipping. They haven't yet. So I'm not driving 20 minutes each way for no tip. Story 83. To be devil's advocate, wealthier people tend to be more vigilant about money because of how common it is for people to hit them up for a loan or skip off the top of their cash. 1.86 isn't a big deal, but then it turns into 5, then 20, etc. I think of it as plugging a leak before it damages anything else. Story 84. Can't imagine why anyone would keep that kind of money in a checking account versus a high-yield savings account, money market account, or CD. With that much in the account, why did McDonald's decline his card? And just so I understand, you're not saying he wasn't entitled to the credit, right? Isn't it good for everyone to check their charges each day to protect against fraud and errors? Answer. I can only imagine how much they had in investments. This was with an online NOFI bank, only checking low-interest savings and small loans credit lines at the time, and was 20 years ago. The charge did go through, but he claimed his receipt said declined. For that small of a purchase, we just credit back without question, especially if there's no history of them having that issue complaint before. They're obviously a good client as well. A bank won't risk losing them over 1.86. In the long run, it would cost more in time energy to get them to show the receipt, fax it, than just to credit. I have no idea if he was entitled to it or not. I just gave it. If the purchase was larger, likely would have had a different process. I don't have nearly that much money, and I personally wouldn't notice by looking at my balance if I was too off. I likely wouldn't think to check if I paid a small cash amount to ensure it didn't come out of my debit account. That's me, though. Story 85. I once split an Uber with a software engineer friend who made well into the high six figures, and when I got dropped off, I didn't even make it to my apartment door before I got the Venmo request for $8.22. I will always remember that moment, haha, edit. I'm not saying it was wrong and I paid it back. It's just not something I'm used to. A lot of my friendships are tit for tat. Answer. This reminds me of a time that I was invited to attend a dinner party at the home of a wealthy power couple I know. They're both top-tier Ivy grads. One was Big Four consultant at the time. The other is a lawyer. They were earning $175,000 $250K each by their mid-20s. To be a gracious guest, I brought 2 mid-range bottles of wine with me, 30-40 total. There were about 6 to 8 guests, and the host served greens, pasta, and chicken. I left after about 2 hours, but before I got home, I received a 30 Venmo request for dinner materials. So I basically spent 70 in Clarns, 6 subway fare, to travel to someone else's neighborhood to have a standing meal from a paper plate in their kitchen. That was the last social event I attended at their home law. Story 86. I think it's more that the traits that allow people to become rich often result in them being the type to penny pinch. The reality is that these little amounts genuinely will not affect them, even over a lifetime. But the type of person who is very aware and protective of where their money goes is also more likely to keep track of the petty stuff. And a lot of stuff, like the friends they make and larger purchases, are calculated. Friends are often other rich people and useful connections. Big purchases are not just things they like, but also items that will not depreciate in value, so their wealth stays the same or increases in a non-taxable way. Story 87. We survive in community, and the discouragement of this is frankly scary. Now, I'm kind of poor, grew up rich. I'll always help someone in need if I can. Through my financial struggles, those who have helped the most have been the poorest. Friend's mom said she helps because she knows they can count on me as well. I'm quite proud to be someone others can count, but I know it means fudge all to a lot of people. Answer. I remember clearly the deaths of 3 men. Un was the richest man of the century, who, having clawed his way to wealth through the souls and bodies of men, spent many years trying to buy back the love he had forfeited, and by that process performed great service to the world, and perhaps had much more than balanced the evils of his rise. I was on a ship when he died. The news was posted on the bulletin board, and nearly everyone received the news with pleasure. Several said, "Thank God that son of a meanie is dead." Then there was a man smart as Satan, who, lacking some perception of human dignity and knowing all too well every aspect of human weakness and wickedness, used his special knowledge to warp men, to buy men, to bribe and threaten and seduce until he found himself in a position of great power. He clothed his motives in the names of virtue, and I have wondered whether he ever knew that no gift will ever buy back a man's love when you have removed his self-love. A bribed man can only dislike his briber. When this man died, the nation rang with praise. There was a third man who perhaps made many errors in performance, but whose effective life was devoted to making men brave and dignified and good in a time when they were poor and frightened, and when ugly forces were loose in the world to utilize their fears. This man was disliked by few. When he died, the people burst into tears in the streets, and their minds wailed, "What can we do now? How can we go on without him?" In uncertainty, I am certain that underneath their topmost layers of frailty, men want to be good and want to be loved. Indeed, most of their vices are attempted shortcuts to love. When a man comes to die, no matter what his talents and influence, ingenious, if he dies unloved, his life must be a failure to him, and his dying a cold horror. We should remember our dying and try so to live that our passing brings no pleasure to the world. John Steinbeck, East of Eden. Story 88. Anytime the discussion about cooking meals at home comes up, so many comments defend takeaway and delivery apps by saying that cooking at home is a luxury for the rich and that poor people work so much that they don't even have time to go to the grocery store. Has creative cooking for people with lower income gone away? Story 89. Yeah, this is the best one in this thread. Grew up poor, now upper middle class or slightly above, and I really don't give a shoot about climbing any higher because what I have is so far beyond what I ever thought I deserved. I have a small business that I could probably grow into a big thing, and I just don't really want to because I'm so content with what I have that I'm complacent about anything more. I'm still waiting for the day I don't have some moment of gratitude for the life I have. Maybe on that day I'll decide to try to climb higher, but I don't think it's going to happen. Story 90. Yeah, people from all socioeconomic classes I think are equally capable of treating poor people like shoot. Wealth unlocks some new possibilities for doing it though, like greed, labor exploitation, political influence, etc. More empathy for poor people is probably true of people who have been poor at some point, or at least spent a significant amount of time with poor people in some capacity. I see the lives of the wealthiest people I know from afar on social media, and at least from their Instagrams, you'd think there isn't a single poor person on earth. Story 91. I still do this, even when I can afford shampoo. The idea of waste on something like that offends something really deep inside me. And when I throw away a tube of toothpaste, you couldn't get a drop out of it if you had a steamroller. Story 92. You don't need to use anywhere near the amount everyone uses. You use a tiny dribble, like maybe a nickel size. Scrub it around, rinse, then do it again. And for some reason, the second time will become so sudsy and so lathery, and your hair gets cleaner while using like a quarter of the shampoo you used doing it wrong. Story 93. This is one I realized when I was discussing the price of a single food item being high. I grew up on the poorer side. When I see something is expensive, even if it's my favorite thing, I'll simply buy something else. No second thought. Maybe an dang. This is apparently not an inherent skill because people are angry if I assume that's how people should think. Story 94. I know a couple making $200K each that at this rate will not be able to afford to retire because they spend all their money on the most ridiculous shoot. It doesn't make sense to me, but at least they're happy now. Story 95. It's debatable. At the top end, they are more used to using people for their position and services. So they end up having a social networks based on how you can essentially complement their lives, not because of genuine social support, which is more common with middle-lower class. Story 96. I get the quote middle class here and tip nicely. I don't want to work and just want to live. I don't even want to be rich, just left alone. Middle-aged millennial, and I am just tired. Tired of waking up thinking my job is something important, work in IT, and it is all bullshit. Pay is good, but it is just stupid. Just want to hang out with my kids. Story 97. So off topic, but I'm a New Zealander, and I was an exchange student in Chicago in the 90s, and I lived on California, a lot further out than 26th, but still, such a thrill to see it. My host grandparents lived on California too. I forget their address, but maybe the 2000 or 1000s. Pretty sure it was either just in or just out of the Chicago city limits. Anyway, I'm so glad your mom was so well taken care of. In my experience, Story 98, the most egregious example of these TV campaigns substituting government responsibility is the Wounded Warrior Project. I haven't looked into whether or not it's an efficient charity, but just the fact that it needs to exist is disgusting. If the government should be doing anything, it's taking care of those in its military and their family members. Answer. The Wounded Warrior Project really helped my dad, but I absolutely agree that we should not have had to turn to them. We shouldn't have needed an advocate to help him get the help and treatment he needed. One of the things they did was send him to a retreat in the woods with other vets with PTSD ECT for a weekend, and it helped him. So, fudge. Much. They helped him get therapy and gave him resources to deal with the PTSD. I honestly can't praise the Wounded Warrior Project enough for how much they helped my dad. I just wish it hadn't come so late. Story 99. Same. Although, weirdly, I have no problem spending it on other people. It's just myself I can't seem to spend money on. I feel guilty about it when I do, and agonize about how I partied too hard, money on myself. Story 100. I have the same problem. I grew up poor and stayed poor even when I had kids, but I made the best of what we had, and they never went hungry though. Even now at 56, I have more money, but feel guilty spending it on myself. My daughter is getting married in September, and am still not ready to get myself something nice for her wedding. It's a horrible feeling. Story 101. Debt is a financial tool. Learn to use it. Rich or poor, a good understanding of debt is a must. It's like a chainsaw. It can do a lot of work for you if used properly. It can also take off an arm and a leg if used inappropriately. Story 102. And this is what I dislike about society. As a whole, we have the power to bring the rich down by not consuming and not helping them. Yet here we are being bootlickers when we meet people like Musk in person. Story 103. Took the words out of my mouth. You don't become rich and kind at the same time. There's a reason they got to a point where they have money, or even being able to keep family wealth. When you are still disciplined with your money, doesn't matter how much you make. Story 104. I swear this shoot only flies in North America and some Scandi countries. If you show up last minute anywhere else, the guest gets the good shoot. Sigh, we've lost all sense of decorum. If my friends come over, I'm not serving them lesser food. We all eat the same, or we eat nothing. That's so disrespectful. Story 105. Not quite the same scenario. The McDonald's staff would generally have no idea what people are worth, unless famous. They're not trying to skim or ask him for a loan. It was an honest error which can happen. I was just shocked they noticed and made the effort to call. Story 106. I can only imagine how much they had in investments. This was with an online NO fee bank, only checking, low-interest savings, and small loans credit lines at the time, and was 20 years ago. The charge did go through, but he claimed his receipt said declined. For that small of a purchase, we just credit back without question, especially if there's no history of them having that issue complaint before. They're obviously a good client as well. A bank won't risk losing them over 1.86. In the long run, it would cost more in time and energy to get them to show the receipt, fax it, than just to credit. I have no idea if he was entitled to it or not. I just gave it. If the purchase was larger, likely would have had a different process. I don't have nearly that much money, and I personally wouldn't notice by looking at my balance if I was too off. I likely wouldn't think to check if I paid a small cash amount to ensure it didn't come out of my debit account. That's me though. Answer. My mom made me go over every banking statement when I opened my first checking account. A bank once made a 400 error on her account and caused her to bounce 2 checks. She instilled in me the notion that if I didn't look out for my interests, no one else would. I still track all of my charges on an app now versus a paper bank statement, but it's just ingrained in me to do that. Just didn't understand why anyone would keep that much in a checking account. Every rich person I know has their money working for them. Go figure. Story 107. This reminds me of a time that I was invited to attend a dinner party at the home of a wealthy power couple I know. They're both top-tier Ivy grads. One was Big Four consultant at the time. The other is a lawyer. They were earning $175,000, $250K each by their mid-20s. To be a gracious guest, I brought 2 mid-range bottles of wine with me, 30-40 total. There were about 6 to 8 guests, and the host served greens, pasta, and chicken. I left after about 2 hours, but before I got home, I received a 30 Venmo request for dinner materials. So I basically spent 70, English, 6 subway fare, to travel to someone else's neighborhood, have a standing meal from a paper plate in their kitchen. That was the last social event I attended at their home Lowell. Story 108. I think this is more of a, let me put this down now so that I don't have to think about it again. It's a lot easier, less stressful to dump a bunch of little things into a batch so you can review it all together. So think of it as, let me look at my Venmo 4 weeks down the line to check for outstanding debts and not having to remember any of this along the way, instead of let me remember to add XYZ to my Venmo constantly for the next few days. I personally appreciate the fact that when I go out for a few days, I have a couple of friends who post all the Venmo Splitwise stuff, and I don't need to think about any of this stuff until after the trip, and all I need to do is just verify what I owe and transfer them the money. One thing I sometimes do is take a picture of the receipts and post it all later, but then that means I need to go through the process, typing emails phone, to get receipts at checkout or getting physical ones at others, which is also kind of a hassle. Story 109. It makes the most sense to Venmo directly after the transaction. Get it over with. That said, I'm more reciprocal with friends. There are no moochers in my life, but if there were, it would become clear pretty quickly and the reciprocity would end. Story 110. In Norway, I remember clearly the deaths of 3 men. One was the richest man of the century, who, having clawed his way to wealth through the souls and bodies of men, spent many years trying to buy back the love he had forfeited, and by that process performed great service to the world, and perhaps had much more than balanced the evils of his rise. I was on a ship when he died. The news was posted on the bulletin board, and nearly everyone received the news with pleasure. Several said, "Thank God that son of a meanie is dead." Then there was a man, smart as Satan, who, lacking some perception of human dignity and knowing all too well every aspect of human weakness and wickedness, used his special knowledge to warp men, to buy men, to bribe and threaten and seduce until he found himself in a position of great power. He clothed his motives in the names of virtue, and I have wondered whether he ever knew that no gift will ever buy back a man's love when you have removed his self-love. A bribed man can only dislike his briber. When this man died, the nation rang with praise. There was a third man, who perhaps made many errors in performance, but whose effective life was devoted to making men brave and dignified, and good in a time when they were poor and frightened, and when ugly forces were loose in the world to utilize their fears. This man was disliked by few. When he died, the people burst into tears in the streets and their minds wailed, "What can we do now? How can we go on without him?" In uncertainty, I am certain that underneath their topmost layers of frailty, men want to be good and want to be loved. Indeed, most of their vices are attempted shortcuts to love. When a man comes to die, no matter what his talents and influence and genius, if he dies unloved, his life must be a failure to him and his dying a cold horror. We should remember our dying and try so to live that our passing brings no pleasure to the world. John Steinbeck, East of Eden. Story 111. Tourism, event industry, hospitality. Those are mostly extremely simple jobs that most people that grew up poor know how to do. Clean a room, prepare meals or serving them, cutting grass, moving stuff off a truck or setting that stuff up. Tourism, depending on where you are, will bring in rich people that don't mind or know what that kind of service should cost. Not to mention stuff like flipping a breaker if power is off in a certain part of your house or plunging a toilet. Story 112. What's wild is takeaway delivery apps aren't for the poor, they're for the rich. I mean, fast food is already incredibly expensive. Now you double the cost of the meal to get it delivered. All I'm saying is, it's actually fairly easy to eat solid food for at least an entire week on the amount of money it would take to order delivery for a single meal. Story 113. My grandmother was the potato wizard. She could make such delicious meals with vegetables grown from her garden. Her fried potatoes made from leftover baked potatoes were the most delicious meal I remember from childhood. A simple lunch of a slice of home made bread with mayo and her garden tomatoes and peppers is also a wonderful memory. Story 114. Given the fees attached to delivery apps, if you're truly working so much you don't have time to buy food and cook, you might actually come out ahead financially by working fewer hours and just cooking instead. Story 115. Now, ordering food is definitely a luxury. There are so many options that are cheap and fast that would have leftovers for a few days. Like I can get a 10-pound bag of potatoes for less than $5 and make a bunch of baked potatoes to reheat all week. Or a lot of spaghetti can be made for $2.50 if I just get noodles and sauce at Dollar Tree, and that's definitely going to have leftovers. If you're genuinely poor, you can't waste your money on a delivery app. It's way too expensive per meal. Story 116. It's a question of how much is my time and mental anguish worth? Household tasks, minor repairs. I'm fine doing most of this, but there are occasions where I'm fortunate enough to be able to say, I am not dealing with this shoot, and wave my CC wand at the problem and it disappears. Story 117. Nothing will make you a better tipper than knowing the tip could be the difference in your delivery driver eating that night, or feeding their child, or paying their rent. Nothing makes people more empathetic than the reality of poverty. Story 118. I know, right? I live in literally the most dangerous part of the UK, and I could go out at night now and just stand there for hours completely 100 safe. I mean, someone will ask for a light, then try to be my friend, and if I fell for it, something bad could happen. But that aside, you just say nah, and they move on, no worries. Answer. It's really not any different here. Most of the people who say those things are just scared of cities in general. I spent years in the worst part of Baltimore, which is a total shoot hole, and never had any issues. But anytime I had someone not from the area bring their car down to the shop, they would always be nervous. One of my buddies wouldn't roll the window down and kept checking the door lock while we were driving in the area, and it was daytime. It's mostly cuss, that's what the news tells them. I'd bet people who live in nicer areas outside your city probably say the same things about where you are. Story 119. The Wounded Warrior Project really helped my dad. But I absolutely agree that we should not have had to turn to them. We shouldn't have needed an advocate to help him get the help and treatment he needed. One of the things they did was send him to a retreat in the woods with other vets with PTSD ECT for a weekend, and it helped him, so fudge, much. They helped him get therapy and gave him resources to deal with the PTSD. I honestly can't praise the Wounded Warrior Project enough for how much they helped my dad. I just wish it hadn't come so late. Story 120. They were pretty screwed up about 10 years ago. They spent ridiculous amounts of money on conferences and executive travel, $26 million in 2014. $3 million was spent sending 500 employees to a single conference, $6,000 apiece for a 4-day conference. Only 60 of their revenues went to directly helping veterans, far below charitable organization guidelines of 75-80. There's something wrong if you're a charity and 40 of your budget goes to administration and fundraising. They ended up firing their CEO and COO and seem to have turned things around. Story 121. It doesn't even matter who you are really or what your job is either. If you want to get rich, you must be willing to take. That goes for situations where your value is worth the high pay too. You're not going to be given what you're worth unless you take it. Story 122. Richer people are vastly more likely to track their money for 2 reasons. First, tracking your money is more likely to result in you accumulating more of it due to you being aware of where your money's going and avoiding waste. Example, I reduced my non-emergency spending by nearly $3K last year just by paying closer attention to what I was spending on and cutting out BS. Not only being $3K extra in my pocket, I threw that in an index fund-based EFT, assuming 10 growth per year for easy math. That will be over $70K when I retire. Second is that tracking your money is a good way to avoid losing it.